Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharp, and headline number one this week, Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes says the conservative group, the Arizona Free Enterprise Club, wants you to get harassed at the polls after a judge sided with that group and blocked certain portions of the election procedures manual that Fontes' office put out. But the Free Enterprise Club's president, Scott Muni, told Jamie West and me on Arizona's Morning News that they're just trying to protect free speech. Headline number two, the race to replace Congressman Ruben Gallego, who's making a run for the U.S. Senate, is headed for a recount because the gap between former Phoenix City Councilwoman Yasmin Ansari and former state lawmaker Raquel Terran ended up being only 42 votes, giving Ansari a 0.1% lead. Arizona's recount law kicks in when the candidates are separated by 5 times that amount. And headline number three, the newly named Harris-Walz presidential ticket makes its first visit to Arizona with a rally in the valley. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's name added to the ticket just 16 days after Harris's name was put at the top of that ticket. Of course, Walz was picked over other VP contenders like Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. And my guest this week on the AZ Political Podcast is KTAR senior election analyst Mike O'Neill. Political analyst, election analyst, is there any difference?
Well, election implies politics is probably broader than elections.
Right. There you go. Yeah, because there's a lot of politics going on behind the scenes, behind the elections. I wanted to talk about, first off, Mark Kelly getting passed over as the vice presidential nominee from the Democratic Party. As somebody who's watched Democratic politics in Arizona for a long time, was that disappointing to you? And do you think Harris made a mistake by doing that?
So far, the pick seems to have worked very well. There's a great deal of enthusiasm out there to pick a guy who comes across as coach. He's just got a warm and fuzzy feel about him. So far, so good.
Yeah, he does have that grandfatherly feel, football coach thing, former teacher, Army National Guard. So he's a veteran. But he's also, some people might argue, to the left of Kamala Harris. He's not even a member. I guess he is also a member, but he was elected to office as a member of the Farmer and Labor Party.
Well, that's a Minnesota thing. Minnesota has a DFL, Democratic Farmer Labor is the name of the Democratic Party in Minnesota. That's a historical anomaly. I think the interesting thing about it is some of the other picks, Kelly and Shapiro in particular, look like geographical plays. Pennsylvania and Arizona are swing states. Pennsylvania was a much bigger prize. And I think Shapiro probably would have done more for cinching Pennsylvania. He's a guy who won by 20. Mark Kelly won the race in Arizona, but by 5. Then you diminish that by the secondary effect. I think this was a very broad play to kind of reassure people about the ticket in general. It doesn't have a dramatic effect in any state. I don't think it alters our whole politics. You can think of as arrayed left to right by state. And you've got California, Rhode Island on the most solid blue state. Mm-hmm. On the right-hand side, you've got, Wyoming, or states we don't talk about very much because they're not in play at all.
Well, they got one rep in Congress and two.
Wyoming, and Kansas, basically the deep red states that we don't talk about. In the middle, you have the 6 states that are truly absolutely down the middle. And if you draw a line at 270 electoral votes, that line currently goes right through Pennsylvania. So Shapiro would have been the conventional geographical pick. Mm-hmm. With that exception, I think Shapiro probably would have cinched Pennsylvania. But then again, it wouldn't necessarily guarantee the whole Midwest. It would be a rare case, however, if it did that. Think back to the last time when a vice presidential pick really won a state for a candidate. I think it's Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
So we make
a Southern guy running with a Yankee.
Yeah, we make a huge thing about it, but in reality, when people vote in November, they're voting for president.
Right.
Vice president, it was a big deal this week because we're all interested in the pick. But fundamentally, you vote for president and you want a vice president that's at least not going to hurt you.
Right. And I could see that definitely she was more comfortable with Tim Walz, so maybe that's what it kind of came down to, is who she gelled with personally better. Not that she has anything against Mark Kelly. Maybe the fact that he's a little shorter than her might have been hard. I don't know.
I mean, it's not like the guys who got passed over are losers. Okay, this is not the Olympics.
Right.
These were 3 or 4 people picked out of an infinite pool of people, and ultimately you have to pick only one.
Yeah.
And, he had a really couple of good performances, the day or two before when she's weighing a final decision. The phrase weird kind of stuck. And that was him.
Tim Walz calling Trump weird,
and that came out sort of naturally from him. And I'm not sure everybody could have used that. But when he used it with his sort of solid Midwestern small town background, said weird. I think it resonated in a way that it wouldn't necessarily had it come from somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So we as Arizonans should not take umbrage at the fact that Mark Kelly got passed over. But what does Kamala Harris and Tim Walz need to talk about to win over Arizona votes? Because we still are a battleground state, maybe not quite as important as Pennsylvania, but we are definitely near the top of the list.
There's only 6 states. I'll tell you the 6 states. If anybody follows politics knows, you know them all. They're in the Midwest: Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. In the southern tier, I think of it, is Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. We don't talk much about Nevada because it's only 7 electoral votes, and there's only like 1 or 2 combinations where winning Nevada makes a difference. But the other states are all mid-sized. They're 10, 12 votes. The 2 biggies are Georgia and Pennsylvania. The others are 10 to 12 votes each. Those are critical. And in fact, Joe Biden, the narrowest path to a Democratic victory involves the northern tier of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and Omaha, Nebraska, the single vote state, which gets you exactly to 270 and can lose the 3 southern states, including Arizona. Now, if Trump were, for example, if I were to look only at one state, it would be Pennsylvania, especially now. If Shapiro had been the vice president, that would probably change Pennsylvania's position a little bit to the left-hand side, and then we're probably looking at another state. But the Pennsylvania is needed right now, because of the way the arithmetic works up, is needed more by Kamala Harris than it is by Donald Trump. It's hard to see a Democratic victory that does not include Pennsylvania. Yeah,
and not to throw Pennsylvania down the stairs, but this is the AZ political podcast. So what does she have to do? What message does she have to say? She's in town. Tim Walz in town. What does Kamala Harris have to talk about to win over Arizona voters?
I think what she needs to do is just to ride the excitement. I don't think there are unique Arizona issues that are terribly different from elsewhere. Actually, the thing you're tempted to say is immigration because we're a border state. Yeah. Actually, that plays louder in some of the northern states that don't have immigrants. They have an image of how bad it is. Right. We're in a border state. How many of us have actually seen an illegal immigrant?
Running across. I've seen
mowing your lawn, maybe.
People running across the border. Right. Yeah.
You've seen the pictures. Everybody in Minnesota's seen the pictures.
Right.
So again, if you want to look at the history of the last couple of weeks, this election, until a month ago, was the most stable in American history. Joe Biden and Donald Trump were virtually tied for a year. The polls didn't move an inch.
Yeah.
Then Joe Biden had a disastrous debate. He only went down a couple of points. But those 2 points flipped all of the swing states in one direction against him, and his position no longer looked tenable. Harris has come on with just a ground. It surprised everybody. I think it surprised her. I think it completely surprised the Trump people.
Yeah.
The excitement that she's generated, which Wall seems to be continuing. And so what happened was that loss of a couple of points was an electoral college disaster, even though it was a couple of points. It seems right now that she's fundamentally gained that back and that we are at pretty much a toss-up level. Now, a toss-up level is probably not good enough for the Democrats because the way the Electoral College worked, last time the Democrat needed to win by about 3 points in raw votes in order to guarantee the Electoral College. That's still approximately true. It may only be 2 points, but you're into a really gray area. She's somewhere around that, somewhere even. I think best guess is she's even now, but if you look at the trajectory, she's going up. I would rather be in her position than Trump's. It's tied, but look at who's going up. Look at who's gaining.
Right.
And right now, that's the Democratic ticket. There's no guarantee that will hold. However, she's getting the bump from the just the one she got when she started, which probably curtailed the Republican bump that they'd get their convention.
Yeah.
And it looks like really good news. Now you're going to have a Democratic convention, which is a 4-day uninterrupted commercial for the Democrats. Probably gets a little bit for that. I think very, very little now because so many people are baked in. We're not going to get the 20-point swings that we got 30, 40 years ago. But if it's only going to be positive. The question is how big.
Right.
My guess is not very big, but in a 50-50 election, 1 percentage point is huge. Mm-hmm. So what do you do to win Arizona? You continue the rise. Rising tide rises all ships. I can't think of almost anything that is uniquely not only Arizona, but these other swing states. They tend to rise a little. The southern tier is a little, maybe about 1% more Trumpy. The northern tier, maybe about 1% more Democrat, which is why I said I could see an election where Harris wins carrying the northern tier but losing the southern tier.
Yeah.
But that is so treacherous because there's no room there for losing anything, including Omaha.
Omaha, yeah. I actually lived there for a short while. One last thing before I let you go. Does Kamala Harris wish she could tap into Ruben Gallego's magic? Because while Trump may have a couple of point advantage in Arizona, Kari Lake is nowhere near that. In fact, she's, according to the polling, losing to Ruben Gallego, a Democrat, who, by the way, was also, until just a few months ago, a member of the progressive wing of the party.
Yeah. I don't know that it's Ruben Gallego magic. I think he has an incredibly weak opponent. That Kari Lake got beat once, and then she doesn't accept the election. She's got this issue of a sore loser and coming across as just out in the extreme. So if you talk about who's perceived as a more extreme candidate, it's Kari Lake. I think Gallego's ahead because he has a weak candidate. Look at what happened in this state in the last election. The top 3 offices, when we lean, generally, a neutral generic Republican will beat a generic Democrat in the state.
Yeah.
The top 3 offices went Democrat. They were all MAGA-identified offices. The 4th candidate, Kimberly Yee, was not, and she won by a whopping margin.
She got the most votes of any Republican candidate running that year.
So we are a lean Republican state. We're not necessarily a MAGA state.
Yeah. Mike O'Neill, always a pleasure to spend some time and tap into that knowledge. I love it. That's Dr. Mike O'Neill, who is KTAR senior political analyst. I'm Jim Sharp. I will see you next week on the AZ Political Podcast.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharp. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.